Welcome to tonight's Candidates Forum, sponsored by the Mashpee Chamber of Commerce and the Mashpee Enterprise. I'm Mary Lou Palumbo, the Mashpee Chamber's Executive Director, and I will be your moderator this evening. The forum will consist of two parts and an opportunity for audience participation. Part 1 will focus on the candidates for school committee. Part 2 will focus on the candidates for selectmen. There will be a chance for audience participation at the end of each segment. The panelists include John Miller, former Mashpee Chamber board member, journalist, political observer, and owner of J. Miller Picture Framers. The other panelists are Patrice Pimentel, Vice President and Branch Manager of Rockland Trust and President of the Mashpee Chamber of Commerce, and Sam Houghton, reporter for the Enterprise. Thank our panelists for being here. And of course, Katie Atchison, the Chamber's Executive Assistant, is our timekeeper. So it's important for our candidates to watch Katie and get the time. The forum, as I said, will consist of two parts, including an opportunity for audience participation. And again, it's school committee first, and then the selectmen. The format will be for each of our three panelists asking a direct question of each candidate in sequence. The candidate to whom the question is posed will have up to 2 minutes for a response. Then each of his or her opponents will follow with a 1 minute, 30-second each for a rebuttal or reaction. We will then move on to the next question, followed again by the 1 minute, 30-minute response and rebuttal opportunities. The timekeeper will hold up a sign when each respondent has 1 minute and then 30 seconds of allotted time remaining. There will be no statements from any candidates. However, each candidate will have 2 minutes for a summary or statement at the end of the Q&A when the panelists are done. At the conclusion, the moderator will accept questions from the audience. Each question should be directed to a specific candidate who will have up to 2 minutes for a reply. Each opponent will then have up to 1 minute, 30 seconds for a rebuttal or comment to the question. A total of 15 minutes will be available for audience questions and candidate replies following each part of the program. Now the rules. Each candidate is asked to focus their comments on the specific question asked. Rebuttal comments should only be pertinent to the question. Panelist questionnaires may inject a brief follow-up question for clarification at his or her discretion. The timekeeper will provide the 1 minute and 30-second warnings, as we said, by holding up the appropriate card. The moderator may cut off any speaker exceeding the allotted time. No personal attacks, derogatory or inflammatory characterizations are permitted. A civilized dialogue is expected. The audience is asked not to applaud, as the disruption will consume a candidate's time. A candidate who does not consume his or her allotted time cannot bank the time for future use. The opportunity is forfeited. During the audience participation segments of the program, the questionnaire will have 1 minute to pose their question and supporting opinion, if any. The timekeeper will provide a 30-second warning. No follow-up questions are allowed. Audience participants are asked to identify themselves when they come up. All right, well, let's begin with our questions. And I believe John Miller has the first question.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome. Who's the first?
I believe that would be me, sir. Yes.
It's been a popular trend to adjust the school start time to a later hour nowadays. The concept is that more sleep will produce a more attentive and higher performing student and perhaps faculty too. Some say, among other things, that it's texting and Snapchat that keeps kids up at night. Mashpee has studied the topic, but thus far has opted against making a change. What do you advocate and why?
Well, thanks for the question, John. So this particular subject is pretty close to me, as I was on that committee that did the research. So obviously I'm not a doctor. I'm just a member of the school committee and a parent. But I can tell you the research was overwhelming that we did find regarding sleep deprivation in kids, especially in the high school age, because their chemistry is different. They're not able to get their body to slow down and adjust accordingly in order to get to bed at a decent time. We're finding that 11 o'clock seems to be the sweet spot. Again, that's according to medical medical history and data, not my own. So in that regard, I would say that I do support a later start time, but the issue is we're dealing with an entire school district, not just high school kids. We're dealing with families. We're dealing with real life. The reason this was tabled indefinitely, there was no decision made either way, was due to that fact, due to the fact that we can't figure out a way to make it feasible for both high school students to get what they need and also to have families maintain their way of life. The last piece of that with the regards to Snapchat and social media and that thing, of course that's happening with especially high school students, but that's not the underlying cause. You know, every kid's different. I'm sure some of them, that's probably part of the problem, but that's not really the big issue here. The big issue is chemically, high school students are unable to get to sleep at an earlier time. So in the end, yes, I would support this, but we really need to come up with a better way to implement this if it's going to happen. Thank you.
Okay, Brian?
Yes. I would have to agree with Mr. Santos in this situation. Having gone through the Mashpee Public Schools and having cousins that reside within that school system today, and seeing how it affects them. You know, a lot of our students might have sports, they have jobs. Some of our youth within the tribe even attend youth council, which is like a voluntary basis type initiative and group that they do. So all of these things, you know, if we're not getting the best of the best, you know, if we can't get out there and get all of the research and the answers that we need to accommodate our families in Mashpee, I think we need to go back to the drawing board and we would have to come up with a better solution. I'm not sure if the subcommittee, you know, they meet, but, you know, maybe we have to look at meeting on weekends. You know, maybe we have working parents that can't make, you know, meetings during weekdays, so on and so forth. So I just agree with everything that's been said, and I think that moving forward that we would need to get the entire community's input on this matter.
Nicole?
So I don't think we can afford to ignore any overwhelming evidence that will help improve school performance. And I think that's exactly what we have in terms of the American Medical Association recommendations. I do think that by focusing on the goal in terms of the actual start times, instead of the criteria for success, which would be limiting impacts to working parents, the childcare concerns, the busing issues, associated budget, if we focused on those issues initially rather than a policy and actual start time, I think we might get to a feasible solution that will work for everybody in the district. And I look forward to helping the district engage Mashpee families and collect information from them directly in the ways that are most suitable for them, not convenient for us. I think what's difficult is you have a committee of volunteers. This wasn't a resourced endeavor necessarily, and I think it's going to be difficult to come up with a cohesive policy without making an additional investment of either time or resources. Thanks.
Thank you. By the way, I'd like to thank our candidates for coming tonight, and we do have Christopher Santos, Brian Whedon, and Nicole Bartlett who are running, and thank you all for coming. We're going to go to our next question from Patrice Pimentel. We're going to go to Brian. Yes.
Hi, Brian. Okay, do you think it is part of the school's responsibility to take an active role with the opiate addiction crisis? And if so, what kind of actions would you take?
Yes, I do believe it is the school committee's role and the school's role. I've stated this before when we had our forum with the Mashpee TV. Some things that I've talked about that we've implemented within the tribe was, you know, the youth sobriety powwow, teaching our youth that, you know, through our culture and who we are as people, that you can walk the red road, you know, and learning all these things, substance, alcohol abuse, all these things are a major issue, but they're high amongst Indian country and with Native Americans especially. This isn't something that we're just now coming into, you know, it's been in our community for quite some time now. And I would look forward to bringing some cultural lessons and education that would help our students to understand more things, you know, about the Wampanoag people and how we would deal with certain issues like this, as well as, like I've stated before, you know, maybe our high school students, we need to start, you know, advertising and start talking about mental and behavioral health, as well as seeing if we can get them Narcan certified and trained. You know, it starts with our students right there, and they see a lot of things going on at home. So as much training and resources we can give them is the best to address this issue.
Thank you, Brian. Nicole?
Yeah, so obviously I think this is something that's within the purview of our schools and something as a student health issue that we need to worry about. Other than focusing on prevention and sort of building relationships within the schools between our faculty, staff, and the children, I think one of the best things we can do is leverage existing efforts within the community by partnering. So we don't always have to reinvent things within the schools when we have good organizations and nonprofits in the community that are doing good work. I also, know a little bit about the Volunteers in Public Schools program that Falmouth runs. It's called VIPS. We used to have one in Mashpee. We don't anymore. But I know a lot of people who speak so highly of that in Falmouth in terms of the mentoring relationships with not just parents in the school district, but other community members, and how that's really had a positive impact in their schools. So I think there's a couple different things that we could look at, and I'd love to explore those as a school committee member.
Thank you, Nicole. Chris?
Well, the two biggest issues that face school-age children when it comes to opiate and heroin addiction are mainly the mental health issues that, it seems to be growing as, time moves on, as well as sports. Those are the two biggest impacts that hit the kids in school right now. So absolutely at home as well as in the schools, it's important to make sure that we keep on top of what's going on, whether it's mental health issues, watching the children as to how they're reacting, how they're engaging with other peers, as well as sports. If there is an injury, what's being prescribed? Are they educated as to what the impacts are if they're not, if they continue to take it? And we have done things in the schools so far, and I'd like to see those continue and grow. We've had speakers come in. We've had Hidden in Plain Sight. We've also had other advocates come in that were addicts themselves that came in and spoke to the kids and explained to them how it impacted their lives. But really, it's about prevention. And when you're talking to especially high school kids and even a little younger, prevention is a difficult thing for them to understand. I mean, anything for them to understand looking forward into the future is a little tough. So reaching them at the earliest age possible, helping them understand what the impacts are and what it could mean for their future is really important. So absolutely, the schools do play a large role as well as the parents.
Okay, thank you, Chris. All right, Sam has our next question, and we'll begin with Nicole.
Nicole, yes, town manager and the town meeting ultimately agreed to cut back from what the superintendent and the school committee originally proposed for a budget. I think the thought was with the tech school coming up and the question that renovations likely going forward, and potentially sewers, there's a lot of talk about saving, and schools are part of that. But if you were elected to the committee, would you fall in line with this level of funding, or would you advocate for more money for the schools?
Well, sorry, microphone issue. I watched the selectmen debate with interest the other day because they said that we're in great financial shape and that we shouldn't be worried about our budget. So maybe I'm being paranoid, but I think level funding isn't going to cut it for our schools. I, as you know, work for the government, and cost of living increases vary from 1% to 2% usually annually, although we don't always get them. And so I think even level funding amounts to an increase if you're just doing a level budget. So I think we had to cut $425,000 from our budget this year to meet that. And a lot of that is being made up out of school choice funds. Some things are coming out of that. So I think that's not really a viable option for fixed costs moving forward. So I think we're going to have to explore some different budget options. And, that $425,000 is exactly the same number as another big expense we had last year. So it's a shame.
All right, Chris?
So with the way the current budget is structured, and I do have the utmost respect for what the town is trying to do. It's not an easy task to withhold, but looking at our budget going forward, right now we are able to handle it for this year because we have an outstanding business manager in the school committee, as well as the superintendent has worked very hard to make that happen. But going forward, it's not going to work. So this year, the governor of Massachusetts has proposed to cut the Chapter 70 funds, which are the funds that come in, excuse me, come into the school from the state. Those funds are actually taken out of the state budget and allocated to each individual school based on the amount of kids that are in that school. So we're looking at about an increase of about $20 per student, which is the lowest amount that we've had in over 6 years. So when our back's up against the wall dealing with the cuts from the state, as well as any potential cuts from the town, it makes it very difficult for us to sustain what we're doing. So next year, we may have to look at other things. Hopefully, we're not sitting here next year talking about adding fees or anything like that. That's not something anybody wants to do, but it's a very realistic option. But it is all of our tax money. It is very important to be fiscally responsible. We'll continue to do everything we possibly can to do it, but this is a school. Things are changing. We're always trying to innovate and create new ideas and get the kids educated the best way possible, and we're going to do it. And if I have to, and I did it a few meetings ago, if I have to speak out and hopefully raise that budget, then I'll continue to do so, whether it's supported or not.
Okay, Chris, your time is up. Thank you. Brian?
Yes. I would just boil down to this. We're a day late and $1 short. The budget has already been presented. The selectmen and the finance committee has already reviewed it. It's gone to the appropriate protocol that it needs to. It's gone to the town meeting and so on and so forth. So as far as this year's budget, it's level funding. We have to stay within that funding. It's the same thing over with the tribe. You have to stay within that budget that you're working with. However, next year, and if elected, this ties back to with what I've been saying with the relationship between the tribe and the town and the school committee, to sit down and have a much needed long discussion and negotiations about providing funding. I've used the intergovernmental agreement between the city of Taunton and the Mashpee Wampanoag tribe, and you can see in there how much they're donating to the Taunton public schools because of the lack of students that they have, whereas we house a lot of Mashpee Wampanoag tribal students here. So definitely looking forward to resolving this issue if elected.
Thank you, Brian. Do we have questions from the audience? All right, why don't you come up? Make sure when you do come up to the podium, you state your name and then ask the question.
My name is Alex Clark. My question is for Brian. Brian, you went to Mashpee High School, and you also, are part of the tribe. I was just wondering how those experiences will help you as a selectman if you were to win on Tuesday.
A selectman. Well, maybe one day. It's okay. Thank you for the question, Alex. Yeah, I think that my experiences within the Mashpee public school system will definitely help me. I've started out going to the Kenneth C. Coombs School, and then I transferred out and I went to Barnstable Public Schools for a while, and I came back within my senior year and graduated from Mashpee. I was determined to come back and be with my classmates and stuff. And just walking through those halls and bringing Diversity Day, sitting on the Human Rights Club and advocating for that, the No Place for Hate, all the great things that Mashpee Public Schools was doing around the time that I was walking those halls, as well as seeing things firsthand. I feel like a lot of the times that the minorities in our town, are unrepresented, and I've seen what they've done to not just Wampanoag students, but other students, with just pushing them through the school system. We have students that get out that can't even read or write, and it's a shame that our public schools are pushing them through, but then again, they don't have anybody sitting up and advocating for them. So I think that on top of all my national experience, not only representing Mashpee Wampanoag tribe, but Mashpee in general, and putting Mashpee on the map. So thank you for that question, Alex.
Any other questions for our school committee candidates?
Hi. My question comes into, we touched upon it earlier about the budget. You say that you're level funded, but you're really you funded a level services budget using the $425,000 out of school choice. My question comes in, though, is when you talk about looking for creative ways to keep the budget under control, and I know generally you try to stay as far away from the classroom as possible. I find it interesting that when I look at the budget, that the budgets are way more than they were when we had enrollments of 2,300, 2,400 students, and you seem to be hovering around 1,660 students over the last few years. Some of it is being maintained due to school choice. We all know that. But what would you do to make this budget stay in check and address the needs of the children without necessarily using school choice, because we all know that's disappearing fast?
Is that for me?
Yes, it is,
Oh,
Chris.
absolutely.
I would like the others to touch upon,
Of
but I know
course.
you're the one that's there.
Of course. So we've talked a lot about this. So one of the big things, one of the reason you had talked about initially why the budget continually seems to be growing at an abnormal rate, if you would, is because of some of the changes. You know, there's a lot more technology involved in the classroom now, and that stuff's not cheap. We got the Chromebooks that rolled out. We also have the preschool program that is doing phenomenal. So that's adding to the budget. We also, and then obviously transportation for the preschool program, which unfortunately has been cut due to trying to keep the budget under control. So there are things that we could do to maintain that. You know, we could limit replacing some of the equipment, some of the IT equipment. We could also limit, like, again, the transportation. Unfortunately, it may come down to whether or not we have to start charging for buses, which a lot of towns do. And again, these are things that we absolutely do not want to do. This would be a last-minute thing. But, you know, to be realistic, if this is the way it goes, you know, if you have no other choice, you have no other choice. We don't want to keep sucking the tax dollars out of the town.
Can I just follow up on that?
Absolutely.
Because to me, it's almost like when you talk about fees, it's a special tax on
Yep.
young parents and young families. So, I mean, I'm looking for more creative than that myself.
No,
so-
and I get it. It's tough to be too creative when you have a budget where most of the budget is teacher salary. That's really tough. That puts a big strain on what we're allowed to do and what we can do. Unfortunately, that's just how it developed over the years. You know, we're working on teacher contracts constantly. They're great teachers. I don't want to take anything away from them, but just like any other contract in any other position, you got to work with what you have. So as far as how exactly we fix this, none of us on the committee know exactly right now. We just got hit with this not 6 months ago, and the budget continually went down. We started with 2%, then it went to 1.5%, then it went to 1%. Now it's at a 0.14 something. So we are going to continue to work on it, and I can guarantee you we're going to stay within that, and we're going to put as least as possible back on the parents. That's not what we're here for. We're here to educate the kids and keep families in the best condition we possibly can.
Thank you. I just would be curious with the newcomers if they have something they'd want to add to that, if that's okay.
You want to go first? Do you want me to?
Ladies first.
Okay. I love being called a newcomer, by the way. It's great. It's great to be 43 and be a newcomer to something.
I wish I was 43.
Yeah. So I think it's a good question, Terry. So one of the things that I have a lot of experience with, I know that a lot of people think the federal government has deep pockets, but we don't for a lot of things. And so a lot of what I've done for the last 8 years in my position here at NOAA is leveraging small bits of money. I'm talking, you know, a few $1,000s to make workshops happen, to bring people together. This challenge of, I think something like 80% of our school's budget is salaries and benefits. That is not unique to the public schools. It sounds a lot like NOAA's budget, actually. And we've made some really concerted choices and decisions over a number of years to collaborate on science, to partner with other entities, not just, you know, nonprofits, but businesses, industry, and other people. And so I think we need to think creatively about ways to build new relationships that can help our schools, because that well will run dry. We can't just keep asking for more money. We have to find ways to leverage new investment. So.
Yes. Well, first off, Terry, I'd like to thank you for your service on the school committee and as a former selectman. You know, it's because of people like you that a lot of us are running to fill the shoes that you had once had on this committee. I think that, like I said before, the tribe pitching in something, you know, whatever it might be, that's always one option. I've also said that it's going to take somebody in there with the right connections. You know, we have real big task, not just this year, but underneath the current presidency and the current Secretary of Education. We're going to get a lot of pushback. So, you know, we need to be ready for this long battle ahead of us, and we need to start looking into other things. You know, Senator Elizabeth Warren is very an active senator, and she's really out there, and she's very passionate about education, you know, so maybe we need to start looking into seeing how we can lobby and get down to D.C. and watch all those bills and all those laws very carefully, just so that way we can come up with a solution for this.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Good luck to all of you.
Terry.
Okay, thank you, Terry. Any other questions for the school committee candidates? David? Okay, state your name and your question.
Good evening, everyone. My name is David Crooks. I have a question for Christopher specifically, and then the other candidates. And I apologize if the information that I'm about to ask is already out there, then forgive me for not being informed before showing up. But for Christopher, you mentioned the $20 increase. Was that an increase in the cuts when you said that number as an increase?
No, so the way that works, it's actually an increase per pupil. So the way the state budget works with the Chapter 70 is they take the entire number of students that are in each school district. They take the entire amount that they have set aside for Chapter 70 and they divide it with the amount of students that are in the state. And then you take these, I forget exactly how much it is. It's, you know, 900 something million, I believe. And divided by the amount of students, it works out to be $20 per student gets added to each school district's budget.
And that's lower than what has previously been?
That is a lot lower than it has
Thank you for
previously
that.
been.
And for the rest of you, if you're interested in the school committee position, what is your accomplishments in the upper level educational system, as in college, postgraduate, anything like that? If you can tell me, tell the listeners here what you have for educational experience. I'd be interested to use that as a tool or a measure to consider your qualifications for the position.
Okay. So initially, I started out in the Air Force. I did 4 years active duty and continued on. I'm now in approaching 19 years total between active duty and the National Guard. I do have a 4-year degree in IT security, as well as approximately 13 certifications across the IT field. Currently, I'm 4 classes away from finishing an MBA program in finance. As well as, you know, countless military training, you know, between IT. I worked out here on the aircraft when we had the F-15s out here. I was an avionics mechanic. So I don't have any specific teaching experience. I've never actually been in the education field per se to work, but I do value education, and I'm always continuing to find ways to learn. So that's pretty much where I stand in that.
Thank you for your service to our country.
Thank you.
Brian.
Yes. On the other hand, I'm one of those that graduated high school in 2011, thought about going to college, but instead I got, you know, into work. I worked with the Plymouth Plantation, learned a lot about, you know, traditional things and knowledge of Wampanoag people that I'd already known, but it just, you know, helped me out a little bit more, as well as working for the Wampanoag Language Reclamation Project, being a language certified teacher of the language, and going to the Mashpee school systems, you know, Kenneth Coombs doing lunch bunch, teaching our children the Wampanoag language, and various other things. Traditionally, education, the school systems is almost an English mentality, because traditionally we didn't have schooling for our kids. You know, you learn from your grandmothers, your grandparents, and so on and so forth. So I think that I have a PhD in Mashpee, you know, because I was born and raised here. You know, my great grandparents, so on and so forth, have led this town and have been town officials. So I think it's in my blood, and win or lose, you know, I do plan on pursuing my education and getting that higher education. But right now, this is just my stop.
Thank you for your interest in our community.
Thank you.
Thanks for the question, David. I'm so glad I met this guy doing this. It's seriously, it's been great just for that. So I was the little girl in kindergarten who brought home every book in my backpack every day. I was a bit of a nerd when it came to school. I really have always loved it. I have an undergraduate degree in political science and journalism. I went to work for my home congressman when I graduated from college. He had just been elected. So I graduated a semester early and started with him in January. And then after working for him for about a year and a half, I went back to graduate school to get a master's degree in public policy because I was very interested in public service and working for the government. And I worked for a couple of a survey research firm that did work with NOAA, and that's how I got introduced to NOAA's mission and started working for them in 2003. And just started pursuing a PhD last fall at UMass Boston, which is the only public institution, higher education institution in Boston, as it turns out. So and that PhD is in environmental science. So working for NOAA, the opportunities I've had to engage with my children's classrooms on science topics have been the most fun for me. We made weather balloons in kindergarten with my son's class, which was a lot of fun. I've brought, we talked about volcanoes, tornadoes. When they find out I work for NOAA, they want me to come in and talk about the weather. So
Thank you.
I do that a lot. Okay, thanks.
All right, well, that concludes our first segment. I want to thank the school committee candidates, and I wish you all the best of luck. Thank you so much for coming. We're going to take a short break, and then we will continue with the candidates for selectmen. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so now we continue with closing statements from our school committee candidates. And why don't we begin with you, Chris?
All right. So, back 3 years ago when I first decided to pull papers and run for school committee, one of the questions I got asked a lot, and I'm sure every candidate on here has, as well as a selectman, is why? Why would you put yourself in that position? Why would you want to do such a thankless job? Even though they do, appreciate what we're doing here. It's one of those jobs that it's a lot of work. There's a lot of time and effort that goes into it, but it's a pretty simple question to answer when you are the type of person that wants to run for one of these positions. So I like to think of myself as a person that loves to help out the community and loves to do what's right. Like I said, I'd spent 19 years volunteered in the military. I want to see what's best for the community and the country. And I also just recently had started up a nonprofit organization to help families with children that suffer from autism. I also have spent a couple years on the middle school council as the chairman, as well as volunteered at the school in countless events and hosted many events to teach parents and students about the dangers of cell phone use and the internet as well. So when, looking forward at the school committee, it was a no-brainer for me. I wanted to see what can be done, help out the community, help the children, and help the families. And that's what it comes down to. It's as simple as that. It has nothing to do with, what I personally get out of it other than the self-satisfaction to see all of those kids walking down the hall and knowing that they have what they need every day, to learn in the best environment they possibly can. So I will continue to do that. If I'm not elected this year, I'll be back here next year, and I'll be here every time until that goal is met. So I do wish everybody the best of luck once again, and we'll see everybody on Tuesday.
Thank you, Chris. Brian?
Thank you. I'd like to thank everyone for coming out tonight and those that are watching, and all of our Mashpee supporters and voters out there. It's a native concept to think about the next 7 generations, just as our ancestors have done before us. 7 generations ago, our ancestors fought so that we could all be here and have this beautiful land here in Mashpee, and still come together as a community and as one people. This is something I spent my whole life. My whole life has been dedicated to youth empowerment and development. I think I'm a qualified candidate from serving on the Cape and Islands Youth Development Council from 2009 to 2011, serving as the founder and chairman of the Mashpee Wampanoag Youth Council, which was founded in 2009, being an election committee volunteer from 2010 to 2014, Mashpee Wampanoag Youth Advisory Committee from 2010 to present, Mashpee Wampanoag Powwow Committee Chairman from 2010 to present, Mashpee Wampanoag Enrollment Committee Chairman from 2013 to 2014, the United National Indian Tribal Youth Executive Committee Northeast Area Representative from 2012 to 2013, also the Unity Executive Committee Male Co-President from 2014 to 2016, as well as the Council of Trustee, as well as National Congress of American Indians Youth Commission Co-Vice President from 2014 to 2016, as well as as a Unity Earth Ambassador, my work with Plymouth Plantation and the Wampanoag Indigenous Program, as well as my work with the Wampanoag Language Reclamation Project. I'm just looking to make a change for all of our youth. Like I've said before, I don't personally have children, but I consider all of your children my children, and I want what's best for them and them to be good citizens of our town. One day they'll step up and they'll lead, so I'm just trying to make a message that you're never too young to get involved and make a change in your local office or whatever it might be, and just keep on doing and pursuing what you want to do and make you happy. So thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Nicole?
Thanks, John and Patrice and Sam, Chamber of Commerce and Mashpee Enterprise for sponsoring tonight's forum. And to you guys, I'm enjoying this. I'm going to be a little sad when we're done here. So I was inspired to run for the school committee initially because when I was started going to the school committee meetings, I just didn't see myself represented there. And when I talked to other working moms, they felt the same. So I guess that's part of the reason I'm here. But beyond just being a working mother of 2 children in Mashpee schools, my strengths are the skills and experience I bring in communications and building partnerships and working with diverse communities. I also have a background in budget and policy, having worked as a civil servant for over 16 years, first for Congress and then at NOAA. I think the school committee should be a bridge between the community and the schools. Effective advocates for our schools have to be willing to engage with people from different backgrounds and reach out to the community in a number of ways. We have to build new policy through engagement that is transparent, equitable, and accessible by all Mashpee families. I think the key to success in this budget climate is partnerships, as I've said, new partnerships with the town, with neighboring towns, with Mashpee Wampanoag tribe, local businesses, and community members. And I believe that partnerships like these will allow us to leverage small investments of time and money to create lasting positive impacts in the community. While Mashpee may continue to lose children to the charter and parochial schools, private schools, I'd really want to make that decision as difficult as possible for my fellow parents. I envision a school system that is looked to as a model for children of all abilities and interests, one that's celebrated for both its teaching staff and its cutting-edge programming. And as we draw more and more kids into the district through school choice, we can use these funds to test and implement even newer ideas. So whether you're a parent or not, we all know that our kids learn as much about the world while they're in school as while they're out of it. And that's why I think our school committee should be a dynamic center of gravity for the exchange of ideas and information that unite us as a community. And I'd like to represent you all there, so I ask for your vote on May 16th. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Thanks again to all of our school committee candidates. And we'll be right back with our selectmen candidates. Thank you.
Thanks, Mary Lou.
Thank you.
Mashpee Chamber of Commerce and the Mashpee Enterprise. If you're just tuning in, I'd like to introduce our panelists again. John Miller, former Mashpee Chamber board member, journalist, political observer, and owner of J. Miller Picture Framers. And Patrice Pimentel, vice president, branch manager of Rockland Trust, and president of the Mashpee Chamber of Commerce, and Sam Houghton, who's a reporter for the Enterprise. And special thanks to Katie Atchison, who's doing the timing. I'd like to introduce our candidates for selectmen. First, we have Shane Clark, Chris Avis, and incumbents Andrew Gottlieb and John Cahalan. And we begin with a question from John Miller to Shane Clark.
Thank you, Madam Moderator, and good evening, gentlemen. Welcome.
Good evening.
None of these questions are in order of relative importance, but this is where we're starting. Mashpee has now joined every other town on the Cape, I believe, save one, by opting to impose an additional 0.75% meals tax on restaurant and takeout food service. It's estimated this will yield some $400,000 in revenue, and suggests when you do the math that food service patrons in this town spend over $53 million a year in this town. What is undefined, to my knowledge, though, is how this windfall will be used. What would you do, and why?
Thank you. Thanks for having me. So this income from this sales tax, I think we would reinvest it, in my opinion, would reinvest it into our children. Whether we can get a community center out here for them, somehow reinvested into the residents of this town. We also need to take a hard look at reinvesting into small businesses in this town and somehow making it profitable. Well, not profitable, but somehow making it comfortable for them to come into our town. You know, we need more companies like Bernard Painting or the Comfort Man on the industrial park. So if we can use these funds that are coming in from the tax of the business and reinvest it into those types of programs, I would be all in favor of that.
Okay, thank you, Shane. Chris?
Yeah, John, it's a great question. I'm not sure if the authority right now has really earmarked these funds yet, but I actually had a conversation with Mary Lou, the Chamber executive, and I think that there's a really good possibility that we should look at a percentage of these funds and have them reinvest back to the Chamber. So it's almost like take 20%, and that 20% of whatever those funds are, invest back into the Chamber to have the Chamber actually work to develop programs to get more people to come to the town. So hopefully we can actually increase that $53 million. And actually, if you look at it, have a program whereas if the revenues of the town go up, then the Chamber actually gets maybe 5% more. So you look at it and say the Chamber now has a skin in the, a horse in the race. Just say the better they do, the better the town does. So I think that would be a positive outcome for some of those funds.
You're thinking that, just as a follow-up, if I may,
Sure.
because many towns on the Cape where they have a lot of accommodations use a portion of the room occupancy tax to subsidize the operations of the Board of Trade or the Chamber in that town. That's probably less popular now than it was once upon a time.
True.
In Mashpee, accommodations are limited, so the meals tax surcharge, so to speak, would be prime for the picking for what you're suggesting.
Yeah, I think I think the chamber, has come to us in recent, past years. I know there was a building up there that we did a 99 lease for free and so forth, and then, something happened up there, and I think actually the chamber is sitting in a better position today downtown, if you want to call that the downtown, but certainly the economic part of the town. But I think it behooves us to look at a way for, the EDIC right now is not really working too well, as you know. So why not invest in the Chamber and have the Chamber have, like I said, skin in the game, whereas if you increase the revenues and so forth, let's give some of this portion of the business back so the business community can look back and say, okay, let's reinvest.
Thank you, Chris. Andrew?
My focus on the time on the board has been looking at the long-term financial well-being of the community. We've done a long-term plan that revealed that in 2021, our ability to fund existing services will exceed our ability to pay for it under the provisions of local tax levy limit requirements of Prop 2.5. The local meals option tax was intended to provide an additional source of revenue to the community as part of our management plan to avoid or delay beyond 2021, the time in which we'd have to ask the voters to provide additional assistance to the community to fund ongoing projects and staffing. So, to my mind, the best use of those funds is to provide us some opportunity to provide real property tax relief to the people who live in the community. The reality also is of that $53 million, while people who live year-round and pay taxes in Mashpee certainly contribute to that $53 million, a lot of that comes from the tourist economy. And so we're finding a way to fund ongoing activities, not solely on the backs of the individual property tax owners. In addition, we also created a debt reserve fund this year at town meeting in an attempt to provide some stability to be able to maintain our buildings and capital facilities and avoid rate shock to our taxpayers. The room that this additional meals tax provides allows us the opportunity to fund a portion of that debt service program and relieve taxpayers.
Thank you, Andrew. John?
This particular path, there's a history to it with the town. When it was originally brought to us that we could add it on to our town revenues, we decided not to. As John said, I thought we were the last ones to do it, but evidently there's one more that hasn't. It was during the recession, and we did not want to get into a situation where we hurt our own merchants with any kind of extra burden, even though it was very slight. It's 75 cents on $100. We also were worried at the time that if we had put it in, and surrounding towns didn't, it put our owners at disadvantage. Now that we're out of a recession and everything seems to be going pretty well, this is money that definitely should be heading into our general fund. It's money that we better hope for the next 10 years we find more and more types of things like this outside the box, as I call them, because that way we won't have to worry about the strain that we're expecting the 23rd. And I think there's other ways we can do it too.
Thank you, John. All right, my next question comes from Patrice, and that will be for Chris Avis.
Hello. Okay, it is widely recognized across the Cape, and no less in Mashpee, the ability to provide employee compensation at a level that is consistent with the cost of living in Mashpee. What is your vision on how to remedy this?
Yeah, it's a great question. I don't think it's just conducive to, Mashpee or the Cape. I think it's sort of statewide. Not necessarily sure if we have a housing issue, but definitely a wage issue. I think it comes down to education. I think it comes down to us looking at the EDIC as trying to bring in some larger businesses, trying to bring in, we have a tourist population. It always has been. The problem with that is that there's, between the municipalities, hospitals, service-related industry, that's really only the driver of the economic wage growth down here. And unfortunately, not attracting big businesses to come down here. I think one of the biggest issues we have is we don't have fiber optics down here. It's very difficult for a larger group of businesses to be able to come down here and not have truly high-speed internet. And it has to be driven by fiber optics. I know it's on the base, I know it's coming to certain places, but before we even begin to look at that infrastructure, has to be upgraded before we can actually start sort of, getting some larger businesses to come down here to take care of the wage growth. Because it's a huge problem, and I don't necessarily think it's going to be something that can be solved individually by the town, but it's a big problem. Huge problem. Great question, Patrice. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Andrew.
Just ask, are you talking about wages, general wages or town wages to town employees?
Generally.
Generally wage, okay. We're challenged. People view the Cape as, a wealthy gated community, when in fact, in reality, there are two Capes. There's the summer population, and then there's the year-round population. The year-round population, average income is below the state average, and it's older than the state average. So there are a lot of challenges with that. The reliance on a seasonal economy, tourist-based economy, has some inherent difficulties associated with it in providing a living wage for people. When combined with the cost of housing, makes it a very difficult thing. In reality, I think it's difficult for a town acting by itself to create a major change in the wage environment. I think there are some things we can do that relate to density and providing some opportunities for higher density to drive down the cost of housing, so that if we can't drive the wages up, we can provide some incentives to keep the housing somewhat more affordable than it already is. I think there remains opportunities at the industrial park area to do some things to change our limitations on what's allowed there. Combine that with the development of more attractive rental housing that might draw young professionals in, and change the mix a little bit. But as long as we continue to rely solely on a tourist-based economy and a seasonal operation, it's going to be an ongoing challenge, and we don't have, in Mashpee or any other municipality, the tools to really change that dynamic.
Thank you, Andrew. John?
I've been involved off and on for a number of years now in the town with affordable housing, and it's amazing the different types of affordable housing. One becomes more important than the other, it seems. At this point here, the one that for years we never talked too much about was actually what it's, the name they call it now is workforce housing. We're going to have to work if we want to have. We're going into a situation at Cape, and I think it's very obvious to everything, is that we're becoming a retirement community, and the only jobs around will be service jobs that do not pay like your regular electronic engineers jobs or your total manufacturing jobs. So we're going to have to find a way that we can supply people and also put them up. So I think we should really, in our future endeavors with affordable housing, the one thing the town can do is to try to specifically make it towards affordable housing. As far as industries go, I've been listening to for years that we got to get big industries down here, important industries. I still think the way you have to go is the small incubator companies and let them grow. That's the only way I think the Cape will get them.
Okay, thank you, John. Shane?
Thank you. I agree. I don't know that the town can so much influence the wages. I think there's other avenues, there's other forces at work as far as wages. I think the town needs to do a better job at welcoming more businesses into our community. So, and I think specifically small businesses. We have the industrial drive, where there's plenty, there's land out there. We need to look at companies. Falmouth has the Cape Associates. These different medical or internet companies, and we need to try and bring those into Mashpee. I think we need to possibly look at our bylaws. I think a quick Google search of the Mashpee Fun Police will show that, whether it was the Lane's Bistro or whether it's Dino's, these headlines where there's, these debates between the Board of Selectmen and the local businesses, those are not helping people that are trying to make decisions whether or not to bring their businesses to Mashpee. So we need to, we have to be cognizant of our residents, we need to be respectful of them, but maybe it's time to go back, look at our bylaws, and find a way that we can make this community more welcoming for small businesses and small business owners.
All right, thank you. We have a question from Sam.
Yeah, it's kind of what everyone's been talking about recently, but the EDIC has been somewhat stagnant recently, some vacancies on the board. So I guess the question is, if elected, how important is the EDIC? How do you, propose spurring development in town?
I think that the EDIC, has done a lot of good work trying to look at options for improving some of the development at the industrial park. I think it's a time, though, that we look at either revamping or maybe even dissolving it, perhaps transferring the funds that came from the sale of the property that the town donated back to the town, and perhaps invest those funds in some changes to development, some changes to the bylaws, perhaps as an incentive fund to provide some incentives or attractions, short-term attractions, to have some smaller businesses or incubators perhaps site in the community. But we've had a roughly 10-year experiment, and I think that it's a time to look at that and say, is it appropriate to do something different than what we have been doing? That said, I think that, it's not to pin the whole effort on the EDIC. There are issues that we deal with, whether it's internet access, transportation's a huge one. The difficulty, Ashby, one of its great attractions is that it's a relatively quiet community, but that does not tend to attract young professionals in the technology field who are looking for a little bit more of a vibe. So I think we need to think about scaling what we allow in the community to to what we say we want in terms of jobs. And I think that if we have a true and honest discussion about that, I think we'll find that we don't want all the things we think we want. And that if given the choice, the community is probably going to tend to choose to be a little bit more similar to what it is now than what it would need to become in order to have a 24/7, most of the night, if not all night, vibe to draw in people like you, Sam.
Thank you, Andrew. John?
You know, I had someone who I was pretty well up on the EDICs down here tell me once, the one thing Mashpee's been extremely good about planning for everything and being the right thing. The one thing we never did is have our own industrial park. And he told me in their own committees that was the key, that they could control their own industrial park and do a lot of things because of that. But when we think about Mashpee, and just think about it now, I already said I don't think you're going to get big electronic companies in here. I don't know if we want them. There's other routes too. I talk about thinking outside the box. I've always said the green tourist industry, we've got to be made for. Look what we have. We have saltwater beaches. We have freshwater beaches. We have the natural wildlife preserve here. It just seems ideal, and it's still a very big up-and-coming section of the economy. I think maybe our EDIC should think more in terms of going after something like that. Aquaculture, the same thing. Maybe what we would like to have in Mashpee, we just can't get. We should look at things that would be conducive to Mashpee.
Thank you, John. Shane?
Thank you. As far as the EDIC and development, I think the biggest issue right now with development in Mashpee is that our town planner is retiring, and we've cut that budget, and they're going to try and refill that position with somebody at a lower budget. So while we go through that process of trying to fill that position, there's no guidance. As far as companies, I agree with these guys. We live here because we love this town. We love what it has to offer, and we want to preserve what we have here in Mashpee. We chose not to live in an urban area, so that's what we need to focus on. I agree with Andrew, we need to preserve what we have in Mashpee, but we also need to bring in some revenue. And that's why I'm a big proponent of small, family-owned businesses. We're not going to bring in big electronic companies. We're not going to bring in manufacturing jobs. But if we can bring in small, family-owned businesses, it's going to do nothing but benefit the town of Mashpee.
Thank you, Shane. Chris?
Sure. So the EDIC, I think, has done some tremendous work over the years. A lot of volunteering, a lot of ideas coming from sort of grassroots business people and so forth, and really tried to get, on sort of the right track. And what is that right track? I'm not really sure anyone knows what the right track is. I think it was said earlier that there's about $350,000 in that account from, the sale of that land. And, I think that there's a partnership available to us with the tribe. I think there's a really, sort of green grassroots ability to bring business into this town that, to one of the speakers said, that's green. Certainly eco tours and so forth, and perhaps we just need to look at this a little differently instead of just looking at, truly a revenue stream. So, I think to your point, Sam, is that it may be defunct right now, but I think we need to rejig that a little bit, and that's something that I'd like to work on because we need to grow this, we need to grow the economic base without a doubt.
Thank you, Chris. Okay, now we'd like to give each candidate a time for your closing statements. You get up to 2 minutes.
I did get a question.
Oh, I'm sorry, John. We forgot John. No, we had 3 questions.
Only 3 questions?
We had 3 questions from our panelists, 1 from each.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's fine.
You have another question? Well, John Miller has another question just for you, John, so go ahead.
I remember there was a 2 years
Oh,
ago.
I had to ask for this. I know.
This one's for
You're
you.
going to get even for everything now.
Town meeting 2 years ago was contentious and enlightening, and one of the outcomes of that was what seemed to be a mutual and symbiotic commitment both by the town, represented by the Board of Selectmen, and the Wampanoag tribe, to renew a commitment toward an open and continuing dialogue. Depending on who you listen to, both sides reached out, I'm not sure to whom, but I think the general sense is that whatever was envisioned from that exchange at the town meeting has never really manifested itself and materialized. I might be misstating or mischaracterizing it, but I'd be interested in your perspectives on whether there are continuing deficiencies in a robust and engaging mutual commitment between the town and the tribe.
I know what you're getting at. It kind of gets complicated, both by the town and the tribe. Yes, there is a lot of cooperation that people don't know about, especially between the Natural Resources Department. It might be saving us a lot of money someday. But there's other factions of the tribe and other factions of the town that are discussing other things and actually outside the purview of the town leadership. So that sounds like there's no communication at all. The biggest thing you were talking about was about the land at the time. No, there has not been any more conversation about it. Both sides have reached out lightly with each other. I hate to talk for the tribe, but I think the tribe is the people who should be talking and can talk and represent the tribe have been very tied up with the litigation they've been involved in the fight for their sovereignty that they've had. So I don't blame them at all, the fact that they don't want to spend a whole afternoon talking to us. It's something when they're ready, I'm sure that we'll sit down and have no problems. We had no problems doing the discussions, which led to our agreement.
Okay, thank you, John. Shane?
Thank you for the question, John. I think this is, in my mind, probably the biggest issue facing this town right now. We as a town have to provide mutual respect to the tribe. There's no question about it. This is the biggest pressing issue that we have. They were here long before we are. All four of us are running for the Board of Selectmen for the town of Mashpee. The name itself comes from the tribe. We have to, as a town, respect their sovereignty, and we have to work together with them. Now, I know, what Mr. Cahalan said, and I don't know what the inner workings are of the Board of Selectmen and with the tribal community. I know with the members of the community that I've had the great pleasure of speaking with, that they're hungry to sit down and meet with the town and work together. Everything that the tribe does will have a direct impact on the town of Mashpee, and vice versa. Everything that this town does is going to have a direct impact on the tribe. I think the biggest key right now is respecting their sovereignty and having open respect for the tribe.
Thank you, Shane. Chris?
Yeah, so I wasn't part of the, any of the talks, obviously being on the Finance Committee and so forth, in regards to the MOU, the Memorandum of Understanding. Certainly, the incumbents can speak at greater length with that. But I went to school down here. I mean, I consider the tribe our neighbors. I went to school with, actually in this building, with a lot of the people that are tribe members and so forth. So there always have been neighbors to me. I consider them neighbors today. There's no division. I don't understand why, per se, there is sort of this little bit of friction that's sort of going on, and a lot of it could be a time constraint, and completely get that. But I think we as a Board of Selectmen need to spend the time and really try to, take 10 minutes or 20 minutes here and there to have open discussions and to keep the conversation open and have questions. I have a lot of questions for the tribe. I'm sure the tribe has a lot of questions for us. And, there has to be open dialogue. And again, I wasn't part of that discussion to know exactly if it faltered, it does seem a little quiet now, John. So that's something that I would like to explore. Absolutely.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Andrew?
We've done some things well, we've done some things poorly. There are some things that John mentioned, we do have good cooperation at the Department of Natural Resources, Resource Department, to the tribe. We've done 2 iterations of the first responder agreement between the tribe and the town. So those types of ministerial things that need to happen, that define the nature of the relationship at one level, have worked reasonably well, and we have effective processes for that. Where we haven't done well is figured out how to talk government to government. We attempted immediately after the town meeting that you referenced to try a somewhat different approach, to try to formalize the conversation a little bit so that it wasn't, I talked to so-and-so and you talked to the other one, and nobody really knew who was speaking for who. It was a series of individual conversations that each individual took away something different from. And so we immediately responded after town meeting and asked to sit down formally. The board decided that it was best to speak, that the chair of the Board of Selectmen at least speak for the town directly to the chairman of the tribal council. And we reached out to try to begin a discussion to get a series of meetings around what the common issues of concern were that they had for us, that we had for them, so we could set an agenda. And by and large, that's where it stopped. We have not been able, to my deep disappointment, because it was one of the 5 priorities that we established as a Board of Selectmen to address and improve the government-to-government relations between ourselves and the tribe, that we have not made more progress on that. And I'm quite disappointed with the outcome of it over the course of the last year.
Thank you, Andrew. All right. Well, good job, John Miller. Thank you for coming up with a question. Now we have our closing statements, and we begin with Shane.
Thank you. Thanks for everybody for having us tonight. I just wanted to, let the voters know a little, why I got into this race and what motivates me to be here. I'm not a politician. I never have been. I don't have a college degree. I have never studied politics, but I'm part of that 2% that votes every year in town elections. I'm that part of that 1.5% that goes to town meeting every year. I've been very active in the community, as a father, as a citizen, as a taxpayer. And there were a few things, in the spring that kind of got me upset about, decisions that have been made in the town hall, and which is fine. The board has the right to make the decisions that they want. But my family said to me, Dad, that the nominations are available for the Board of Selectmen. Maybe you should run. And I said, me? I said, I'm not a politician. You want me to run for the Board of Selectmen? And they said, you know what, Dad? You have the passion and the love for the town of Mashpee, and that's what a selectman is. As long as you have that and you can bring that passion and that love for the town to the board, you're going to do what's right for the town, and you're going to do what's right for the taxpayer. And that's what I'm here for. It's that my whole agenda is to preserve what we have in Mashpee, to continue to move forward, to respect our taxpayers, and make sure that they get the services that they deserve. Thank you.
Thank you, Shane. Chris?
So I'd like to thank you guys for holding this forum. I think it's great for the voters to get involved. I've been on the Finance Committee, as you know, for approximately 10 years. I don't consider myself a politician. However, I guess I could be construed as one. I feel as though, I've grown up in Mashpee. I love this town. This is a time and a place for me, I think, to get even more involved. I think my background lends itself to, keeping Mashpee affordable. I think it's keeping Mashpee, the beautiful place and the natural resources that we have. I think it's working with our neighbors. The Board of Selectmen, in my opinion, have a great amount of power that, if yielded correctly, should actually spur questions. And I think what we're not doing today is asking enough questions. We've got voter apathy, and I think through, the new technology, whether it be social media or the internet and so forth, there's got to be a way that we can sort of get the conversation going. And that's the real reason why, I want to be a selectman. I want the questions that come from people. I want the board to react. I want the board to be able to, have healthy discussions, not only amongst ourselves, but amongst the townspeople, and to get everybody involved. We're coming into a situation where, we have to be somewhat fiscally responsible, but that doesn't mean that we need to cut back and reduce services and level fund schools and so forth. I think there's ways for us to be able to get the job done effectively, and where we can get people more motivated to, get involved. So I look for your vote on May 16th. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Andrew?
I'd like to thank everybody for taking the time to watch tonight, and you for hosting us. I've been involved in public service my entire adult life in one form or another, both for the town of Mashpee and elsewhere. And I guess, to be honest, most people might look at me and say, you are a politician. And you know what? I'll embrace that title, because I actually think that public service, especially at the local level, is a noble undertaking. I think at the local level we have the opportunity to affect the lives of people in a positive way, change their experience in the community, and create a sense of unity and accomplishment towards a shared community vision. I believe that I contribute positively to that, and have on the Board of Selectmen, both through this last term and the two that I had preceding it back in the late 1980s. And I also like to think that, unlike the more pejorative term of politician, I'm willing to tell people what they need to hear and what they need to know, rather than what they just want to hear and what's easy for me to tell you. The time I've spent on the board, I've embraced the notion that asking hard questions. If people don't have the time, as Chris cites, to come out and participate as fully as we might like them to, they rely on us to dig through the information, to get through the clutter, and to ask hard questions, to be able to answer to the community that what we're putting forward, what we're asking them to spend their money on, and the programs that we're putting forward represent an appropriate and wise expenditure of the scarce public resources that they're entitling us to manage. And I believe that I've played that role effectively on the board, and I think to the town's benefit, and it's a role I'd like to continue, and I ask for people's vote next Tuesday.
Thank you, Andrew. John?
First of all, I'd like to thank Mary Lou, Sam, Patrice, John, for putting up with us tonight and making us look good. As far as Mashpee goes, I believe Mashpee is the finest town on Cape Cod. Financially stable, we can prove it with our AAA rating. Our town service is as good, if not better, than any other town on the Cape. You think over Mashpee, we have championship golf courses, we have first-class shopping centers, we have nationally awarded developments for design and placement. We have natural resources that, just can't be compared to. I'm very proud to be part of the team that has kept Mashpee the way it is. I have a cliche I always have used, is if it isn't broken, don't fix it, just try to make it better. And I'd like to ask everyone to please consider me next Tuesday for re-election to the Board of Selectmen. Thank you.
Thank you, John. All right, we'll open it up for audience questions. Does anyone have any questions? If you do, come on up, state your name, and ask the question, please.
My name is David Crooks. I've lived here since '94. My question for the selectmen, the candidates, is what are your thoughts about increasing the town revenue by making an effort, if it hasn't already been done? And I know that there's some discussions, and once again, I speak from ignorance. I should know more to ask the question, but I don't, about bringing in hotels, or a hotel, Marriott, a chain, someone who would be able to provide a tax base for us. Have there been any efforts? What are your thoughts as far as making continued efforts? Can we do anything to make an attractive proposal to a chain to come in create a new tax base for us that would obviously
Who
bring
do you
in.
want to answer that?
I'd request that each one of you start possibly with Christopher Avis.
Sure, sure. Absolutely agree. We need a hotel. You know, between all of the country clubs around here and facilities that can provide weddings, you know, we have a lot of people who need to stay, you know, whether it be in Falmouth or Yarmouth and so forth, David. So there's absolutely no question in my mind. We need more accommodations in this town. I understand just recently that there actually are some people who are poking at Mashpee for looking at building hotels. Part of the issue, as you can imagine, trying to attract, you know, larger chains and so forth, is the seasonality of it, right? So they're full in the winter. Maybe the shoulder season's a little off, but winter's really tough. So, you know, I think it's probably would be a little difficult to attract the Hyatt, Marriotts, and Hiltons of the world, but I think that there's, you know, a need, without a doubt, a need for us to be able to provide, you know, and get those revenues. So, you know, that could be another part of that EDIC that we spoke of earlier, that was John's question, or Sam's question, in regards to, you know, maybe trying to reach out and selling the town on some type of, you know, accommodations, whether, you know, whatever that may be, hotels or and stuff. So, no, very good point.
We've had a number of analyses done over the years, most recently 2 years ago, on the market conditions in the Upper Cape in general. And basically what we've been told is that with the absence of a site, the waterfront site, that the Mashpee market, because of the seasonality and the lack of the off-season draw beyond the shoulder seasons, is not one in which the hotel markets find it advantageous to them to build. So we're at a little bit of a disadvantage. You know, we can want to, it's unequivocal that having a accommodation business or a hotel in town would provide enhanced property tax revenues plus the rooms tax, so it'd be good for the town. So we clearly want it. Our wanting it isn't going to make a private company build one here unless we were to get into a serious conversation about either donating land or providing significant tax breaks, neither of which have been in the history of the community. The only place we've really done any of the land donations has been on the affordable housing side. We haven't provided that kind of space to a commercial entity. I'm not convinced, despite our desire, that those moderate to high-end hotels view Mashpee as a suitable destination for them. So I think we should be open to it, but I'm not pinning my hopes on our financial stability and our ability to get one in the next couple of years.
And you don't believe that there would be the benefit of additional revenues as those overnight guests come in?
It depends how much you have to give back to the company to get in to know whether the numbers are going to work. And we have not even gotten far enough along in a conversation with a significant chain to have them ask us for a certain amount of money, subsidy, or tax relief.
Thank you. You have considered it, though. Thank you.
Oh, yeah.
John?
Yeah, this is kind of an easy one for me to answer because it was the business I was in and we dealt with a lot of them. Just to give you a quick formula, how the hotels work is you need a 72% occupancy year-round. How that comes about, you don't know. Mashpee falls kind of short on that. But there are things that we've just had, there's a new company and we don't know much about it. Was talking about using a new hotel system they have in where they're actually looking for the 1 week, 2 week stay from such as a scientist from Woods Holes in for the 2 weeks. That formula, I don't know what it is. Maybe that works. As far as the Marriotts or anything like that Chris talked about, that we could get them in a minute if we let them build resorts on the ocean here and then not let our people go near the resorts. So that's out. as long as I've been around, almost every single board, whether it's selectmen, whether it's finance, whether it's EDIC, whether it's planning, all has that in the back of the mind. We all know that a hotel would be a great, great achievement for Mashpee, and it would also bring win-win situations for other things. So we're looking to do it. Maybe we'll find a way. We keep trying.
Thank you. Shane?
Thank you. I think I'm going to be the lone voice here, but I'm not in favor, and I'll tell you why. Like I said in my closing, like, I'm here to preserve Mashpee for what we have, and I don't live here because I want to live in downtown Hyannis or downtown Falmouth. I want to live in Mashpee, and I want it to be the way it is. I understand that there's a revenue stream, but I don't know that this thing would be profitable. All we have to do is look at the Mashpee Commons and the turnover rate that they have there in small businesses. You know, the businesses are coming and going in the Mashpee Commons, and if they can't stay afloat, why would we open this Pandora's box in the hopes that a hotel will stay afloat and provide an income stream? I wouldn't be in favor of it.
Thank you.
I have one more thing. Mashpee Commons is a very, very profitable thing to us. It's not the owners in there, it's the real estate tax. Mashpee Commons, as soon as someone leaves, they fill it again.
And I have one question specifically. As a follow-up to a statement you made in your comments, you were upset with something that the selectmen had done, which is what prompted your family to speak to you about running. What was it that they did that caused you
Not so much upset, but,
What specifically?
So there's two items specifically. There's no secret that I am dead set against the privatization of our EMS service. We know that the town manager has been given the permission to do a study to look into the feasibility of private EMS. I spent 13 years in that industry. I can tell every resident of this town the business model. They're a for-profit industry. They're not a for-community industry. They're not a for-patient industry. They're a for-profit industry. So that was the first catalyst. But we didn't want to get involved in that time because I think at this point everybody knows that I work in the fire service. We felt that there was, a potential conflict. And then the tech school thing really, I thought that was a knee-jerk reaction, and it really upset me that, they were discussing pulling out of the Cape Cod Tech. It was a school that was very good to my family, to my loved ones, and, we can all sit here and talk about creating jobs and bringing, jobs into the community. Those kids coming out of the tech are going to fill those jobs. So we need to continue to support them. So it was those two items together that my family goaded me into running for this position.
Thank you.
Can I speak to that? I think, the issue that Shane brings up, is worth discussing. I think that, first of all, the board did not say that we wanted to privatize. What we said was, we want to look at the costs and benefits, pros and cons of that question. And I guess if you're entering the position saying that certain things are off the table and that public sector salaries and personnel are off the table because it provides a service, that's 90% of the budget in this town. So if we're not going to look at 90% of the budget and we're going to expand it, then you can't then honestly say, well, we're going to keep the community affordable for people, because if you're not willing to look at some of the cost drivers and those costs are going to continue to go up, you're going to go back to people and say, you got to pay more. So, what I feel like we're being criticized for is being able and willing to look at where we're spending money and whether there are options for dealing with how we spend that money that would benefit the community. That's not the same thing as saying we're going to privatize ambulance service. We never said we were going to privatize ambulance service. What we told the town manager to do was look at the costs and benefits, bring that information back to us, so we can make an informed decision about priorities on where we're going to spend money. And if we're going to say, as a Board of Selectmen, that we're not willing to look at how we're spending money, what we are telling you, without telling you, is we're going to raise your taxes and make the community unaffordable. This board, and I'm proud of it, has been unwilling to take that tact. We've been willing to look at where we're spending money, and if we need to go back to the voters and say we need more money, we're going to have the information to justify it. But without asking the questions, you can't justify anything. You're just doing what you've been doing because that's what you've been doing.
Thank you, Andrew. Chris?
Oh,
do you want
y'all
do you want-
speaking on this?
Well, you can if you want to. You have that option.
No, I'm good.
John?
We'll let us go at it.
I wasn't on the board.
I
Wasn't
think
part of this
it's,
conversation.
I think it's our duty, matter of fact, I know it's our duty, to at least check and be knowledgeable of everything that can cost the town, either save the town or cost the town money. As far as the ambulance service goes, God knows, they've taken me a couple of times to save my life. I would never want to see them go. But that's not my decision to look at figures and see if we get into a situation where we had to do it, at least we know we could do it.
Thank you. Any other audience questions? Nicole?
Hi, I'm Nicole Bartlett. I'm running for school committee, so I have a question about schools. You guys, in your answers, talked about things that attract people to Mashpee, and what attracts small family-run businesses and young professionals are
Excellent
good schools. I can tell you that. And so what would you say to the parents in this community or, new families that are considering where they want to live, perhaps on the Upper Cape, to reassure them that we're going to continue to make investments in our schools, given, the budget and what you guys have said about, the potential of a cliff in 5 years? I would like to be reassured.
You would like me to start that?
Sure, you can start,
I
John.
agree with you 100%. As you probably well know, being a parent, and the school committee knows, is our school developed a pretty bad reputation, of which you're now fighting your way out. I'm not sure where you're at now. I will be the happiest person in the world when you get back to being a normal school and not the state overlooking you, because at that case, we won't need any children of choice anymore, because the people in Mashpee will be saying, we want to keep our kids here. It has all kinds of benefits to it. So someone comes to me and says, this will make us better. I don't mind spending the extra money. In the past, I've seen money thrown at it and seen the scores go down.
I guess my answer to it would be that dollars spent is one measure of a community's commitment to education. I'm not sure it really speaks to the quality of the experience that kids receive within the four walls of the school. So while I understand that the same factors that drive the town side budget on personnel play out in almost an identical way in driving the school's budget, I don't want to fall into the trap of just saying, well, we're throwing more money at the schools, so the education's better. I think there has been progress under the current administration to improve the experience of the kids and the performance of the schools. To the extent we can continue that going and then can have a conversation about what resources are really needed in order to make that happen, I'm open to that. I think the results are better as an attraction to young families and as a tool for retention than the fact that we spent more money. The other thing I would argue is that it's very much in the school's interest that we actively and aggressively manage our budget right now so that we don't get into a situation that you see in other communities where a large override is needed, and the political thing to do often is, well, let's put it on the schools because that's going to draw the parents in. They're going to vote for it. And then it doesn't happen, and then all of a sudden you see a sharp drop in your ability to provide stable services. So I think even though it's difficult and sometimes unpleasant for everybody involved to be in this constant attempt to draw efficiencies and improvements out of close to level funded budgets, I think over the long term, it provides a more stable source of funding for both town side and school side operations and avoids that perilous cliff that we've seen backfire in a number of communities.
Yeah, and I would say, this whole study was initiated by the Finance Committee, which was, we've been asking for a 5, 10, and 20-year outlook based on current trends. And we finally got it. And it did reveal sort of a spending problem that if we continue down the same road, 2021, we run the risk of potentially having to do a Proposition 2.5, which in recent memory, we haven't had one. I can't even remember in the 10 years that I've been, on the Finance Committee, we've never had one.
We have one on the ballot this time, but it's a debt exclusion.
Debt exclusion, right.
But it's 2.5.
Inside
No.
2.5.
Outside.
Outside 2.5,
Yes.
thank you. So, we had to go to the school. One thing I can tell you is the history with the school and so forth under previous superintendents and so forth was very contentious. And there was a lot of, monies that were sort of held over. And, the good news is that, in the past several years under the new administration, we've had very serious and nice talks. It's all out in the open. It's not you either do this or don't do that. We work together. The school committee, as of late, under Patty and even Brian and so forth, we work really well together. And we understand that there's, it's not two sides. We're a town. And the town needs to tighten its belt, and the school needs to tighten its belt a little bit as well. There was no services or anything based on, them losing their 400,000, whatever. So, making a long story short, I think we're working really well together today. And I think we can continue to do that in the future.
Thank you. Shane?
Thank you. I think, much like yourself, I watched the school committee debate, and I think Chris hit it, I think he hit the nail on the head. The school committee is continuously asked to do more. They're having more mandates from the government come down, and the town is taking money away from them. I don't know that, throwing money at the school in bags full of money and investing in the school, I agree with Andrew, that's not going to fix the problem. But taking money away from them is certainly not the answer. I think we need to invest money into the school. We need to, I think Mashpee schools are great. I don't know that there's any debate about it. I think that the schools themselves are great. I think the current school committee has done a great job. I think Mrs. DeBoer has done a great job. But I think we need to continuously reinvest into the school. We need to make it, we can't cut money from them and continue to ask them to educate our children. It doesn't, it's not going to work that way. I have the great pleasure. My wife works in the public school, and she comes home every day. And, no disrespect to the school committee. I knew they do a great job. But she comes home every day with complaints about, things that should be getting done that aren't getting done. And it's tough to implement these programs when the town takes money away from the budget. So I think that we need to invest in the schools. And I know it's a tough, and I know, nobody wants to talk about it. Nobody wants to talk about spending money. But if we can invest, we've talked about jobs earlier tonight, and there's no jobs for these kids. They're all, all of our kids are growing up and leaving the town of Mashpee and taking their services elsewhere. But we have them for 12 years. So let's do everything we can to educate these kids for those 12 years and make them, great citizens. And they may very well come back here and bring their ideas back and reinvest into our community.
Great, thank you.
We have time for the last question.
Hi, David Whedon, Mashpee resident, and I also sit on the town's planning board. My question is, sitting here and listening to everyone talk, it sounds like, planning and development and guidance on the town's future development with regard to businesses and residential housing and stuff. There's a lot of planning, but the town just approved the budget that has taken away from the town planning department, and so I'm concerned. This town has history with some private interest sitting on the table at the selectmen level, and there was rapid development. The town grew at alarming rates for a period of time, and without a planning department that's funded properly and adequately to do their job thoroughly, I don't know how you're going to meet a lot of the goals. I hear a lot of personal ideas that are being presented. I don't know what kind of background anybody has in planning, but the board's recommendation and the budget they just passed, it doesn't reflect that they're supporting the planning department. Also, I sit on the Cape Cod Commission as well. The Cape Cod Commission is a wonderful resource. They do a lot of research, a lot of studies specific to planning. And so I'm wondering what the selectmen, if elected, how you will ensure that or take advantage of the resources that the Cape Cod Commission has with regard to all their studies. They're revising their regional policy plan right now. Mashpee hasn't, as I said at the town meeting, Mashpee has not revised their comprehensive plan, which guides the town to align it with the regional policy plan. They haven't revised their comprehensive plan at the Mashpee level in a number of years. And, it sounds like something like that, a comprehensive plan would do exactly what everyone's talking about. It would guide the town in a direction that's sustainable, but also takes into consideration the preserving the unique character of the town, which that hasn't been done. The character of the town has changed dramatically in my lifetime. So I'm asking, how are you going to ensure that the planning department is properly staffed? Tom Fidello might leave, so if elected,
I'll jump in. I mean, with Tom, we at town meeting, I think it came across as somewhat confused, but we currently in this fiscal year have funded a full-time planner position, which is Tom Fidelis. Tom has notified us he is retiring on or around the beginning of 2018. The budget that passed town meeting fully funds Tom's position for the remainder of his time here and for the balance of the fiscal year after he retires and he's replaced. We also created a full-time assistant planner position and funded that at a half-time level starting July 1. So we actually increased resources to the planning department starting July 1 with the express intent of creating an ability to have an orderly transition from the time when Tom retires to when we get somebody to replace him. And I say replace him loosely because you don't take somebody who's got 30 years invested in the community the way he does, his knowledge and understanding of the history of the community and the planning around it, and just bring somebody in and say you're going to just do exactly what he did. But we are committed this fiscal year, starting July 1, to having 1.5 positions in the planning department so that the work that needed to be done to revise the local comprehensive plan can be done and started because there'll be an additional resource there, whereas the majority of Tom's time, is consumed by doing the ministerial functions, supporting the planning board and its regulatory activities, and there's no time left to do that plan. So we have invested more. We are aware, and we do have a management plan to make sure that we're in a position to adjust to Tom's departure in as orderly and seamless a fashion as we possibly can.
I very quickly, we also added on an administrative secretary part-time. So I know it's not the answer, but he's got a lot more than he had last year.
Yeah, and I would say too, David, that that it was confusing to the finance committee as well as to put a full-time position on the thing, but only fund half of it. But that's primarily was done, as Andy said. Tom has already announced, as he said in town meeting, he's out of here, right? He's done. So we wanted to get somebody in that position to mirror the work that Tom does today for, as long as possible. We're in the process of hiring somebody. I'm not sure if we've found the person yet, but to get somebody that would, work right along with Tom and so forth. And then there's a possibility that I heard, don't quote me, but that there's a real possibility that that person would then be full-time, and Tom, if he wanted to, could go half-time and fill that other position and still make that transition as seamless as possible. Now, I can't speak to that. I'm not on the board. I'm not on the hiring thing. That's how it was, is what I've sort of heard through the grapevine.
As far as the town planner, I agree that the position needs to be filled. I got the explanation at the town hall and I understood it. But I think that the budget for the planning office has been cut. So we're going to replace Tom Fadula, and I could be wrong and misspoken, but we're going to replace him at a lower salary, which I don't know how well we're going to be able to attract somebody into the town that has done the job that he has done at a lower salary. And I could be wrong, but I think that that's the biggest concern with the planning department. And while we're trying to find somebody to fill his position at a lower salary, that position could go unopened. I think also, if you look at, tonight's meeting, last year's Chamber of Commerce meeting, the year before that, the same questions come up about development, and the same ideas keep coming up about development and bringing jobs in and creating jobs and affordable housing. But it may be time to look outwards. The board continuously comes up with the same answers every year, but there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of movement on any of it. If there's other resources outside of the town, then yeah, maybe we need to reach out to the Cape Cod Commission and get a plan from them or get some ideas from them. But, that's where I am.
Thank you.
All right. Well, that concludes tonight's forum. I want to thank our panelists, John, Patrice, Sam, and our timekeeper, Katie Atchison, for the great job. All the candidates, I wish you all the best of luck. But most importantly, want to remind everyone the election is next Tuesday. Go out and vote. And thank you so much for watching. Have a good night. Oh, and by the way, I just want to thank Mashpee TV, too. They do a fantastic job bringing these forums to the people. Thank you.
Thank you.